Introduction of Book of Daniel in TBAI, The Beloved and I. The scholars are sure that the Book of Daniel was writ in the nook of 167 before Christ to 164 in a trice, in answer to the challenges of Antioch Epiphanes, who ravaged city and God's house, fearsome to humankind and mouse. The theory that Antiochus is the little horn with a fuss in chapter 7 is as old as Josephus's writing bold, who was close enough to the game to still bear the brunt and the shame of the shock. But this theory now relies on the assumptions prow that Daniel is a fiction and could not have written in the stand of the 6th century things that came to pass later than his life's claim. Denial of prophetic gift and Antiochus are in drift together and they do not rift. Traditional view is the book was written when it claims in Brook. The problem with this view is just that it requires prophetic thrust, ability, God-given or not, to see before time earthly plot. Most prophecy is so unclear that it can be dismissed by ear. But Daniel takes it to a notch above the general in crotch. Detailed and sweeping, it remains the target of doubt in the drains. My own view is that prophecy, prediction of the future is possible without recourse to supernatural perforce. Astute and careful sight of facts may well inform of how one acts, and what governments and kings might do next week given what's in sight. Just as historian of art can tell two artists' work apart, while those who do not know the style may miss the guess by half a mile, so too an informed man may trust his guess of what may hit the dust. The future is related to the past by cause and effect due, or by the structure of events. It does not take God's hand intense, though he may well show his presence. The critics' attacks on the book have fallen one by one to look, until the main one that is left is who was Darius bereft? The Mede. That's hardly enough now to damn the book with crease of brow. It seems now Aramaic that garnishes the book is as fat as what we might expect to find in the 6th century when not blind. The kingship of Belshazzar has been adequately brought to jazz. There are no serious blocks today to origins of early sway, with the exception that prediction is too detailed for the affliction of doubters who wrongly think they must admit the divine in sway. If they admit an early date, let everyone choose his own mate. Natural predictions limited to events and trends in the bid that can be linked to things observed. The arbitrary must be swerved, such as names of a future king. Daniel is able thus to sing at a certain point what will come to Babylon and what will hum in Medo-Persia. He is able to predict the next power on table, the Grecian one, but he is not able to give a name to plot of powers to follow it. This is an argument in favor's fizz for my theory of astute guessing at the future as a confessing of the prophetic utterance. Of course, those who favor the dance under Antiochus will note the danger of stating in quote the names of living rulers as evidence against my clear jazz, having thrown a sop to the quaint views of academic and Sant, the Millerite faiths that succeed in numbers to which we give heed. The Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses in band show that historicistic thought is seminal for modern drought. Prediction does not disturb me in my views that are scholarly, since I do not expect the way of science to explain the ray of all of Earth's reality. Therefore perceived naivete in such faith strikes me as fancy of bias only on a spree. My own view is a mystic ride, without regard to where the tide and when. I merely would abide, as long as the book has in time been held canonical in clime, and may be read in function of the Decalogue, my own first love. It is acceptable to me, and I will read it faithfully. Apocalyptic thought that runs among lawkeepers on their buns. The folk who celebrate the day of Sabbath in obedience, sway, goes back to Mill Yard in London in the 1600s for fun, where John James preached Fifth Monarchy, influenced by Sabbatai ZVI. The German Baptist Sabbath keepers were parallel but later reapers. Yet Isaac Newton was a man who greatly influenced the scan. William Miller, American, followed his footprints for a span. Adam Clarke was the source who stood informing Uriah Smith's wood, the one I think who keeps the stall of the historicist in call. better than any other Met. Like Newton, he sees beyond threat of all the evil in the world. The fault of Roman come uncurled, to find the Ottoman displayed in Daniel 11's parade. I would go further than those two, and see that false Islamic crew even more widely come to view. One thus escapes reformers' bias, raising an ugly head to try us. I come to this conclusion by applying Smith's principle try, with more consistency than he, and so more hope of truth to see. His principles are that the text is to be understood perplexed, in sequence chronological, and all the figures in their stall are well identified in thrall, by territory in land's call. He applies this consistently to define the kings faithfully, of burgeoned north and cunning south, but he fails to keep his own mouth on both accounts when he comes to Daniel 11:22. With arbitrary count he breaks the time sequence there when he takes verse 23 and jumps back 200 years and to misconstrue, retaining Smith's two rules of thumb, time sequence and the land for drum. The meaning of the figures late shifts away from the papal state to local rulers of the land of Palestine, that is, the band of Islamic establishment in palace or Bedouin tent, while implications in terms of Smith's overall view come to shove are immense. It is all based on this one small inference here drawn. My application of some features to Musulman state in its bleachers, in contradistinction before the house of Muhammad in score, upon whom be peace, is my own, but hardly unique to the bone, as other readers have researched that line more thoroughly and perched. Isaac Newton, of all time greatest, of historicist thought not latest, is credited to have first seen prophetic cycles in the lean chapters of Daniel and John. In fact, I think it can be drawn that Hippolytus also thought in terms of cycles in the plot, but Newton also treats at least the end of Daniel 11's feast as Ottoman Turkey for beast. And Smith agrees to extend this Islamic emphasis in bliss back over all four visions there, as well as chapter 12 in share, is logical consistency. It's by comparison made free with 8, 20 and 21. The empires of Medo-Persian and Grecia can be superimposed on Daniel's image head and toast by the same token on the basis of Daniel 11 in Oasis. The feet of iron and clay, the horn of chapter 7 and forlorn, the other horn of chapter 8, we can with sure logic equate with the kings of the north and south, respectively as Sunite mouth, after verse 30 by its date. So head of gold of Daniel 2 is the winged lion set and true of Daniel 7, and we know that to be Babylon in show. The chest of silver in the rate of Daniel 2 finds its own mate in the bear of Daniel 7 and in ram of Daniel 8 to stand. These are the kings of Persia set in Daniel 11, 2 met. The thighs of brass in Daniel 2 are the same kingdom to be true as the winged leopard that flies out of Daniel 7, and no doubt the he-goat of chapter 8 too. Grecia called mighty king in view in Daniel 11, 3, predicting Alexander's spree. The legs of iron in Daniel 2 are the same kingdom spied and true as the great beast of Daniel 7, and to follow structures for heaven. It must be the four horns that rate attention in Daniel 8. Such are then the four winds that blow out of Daniel 11:4. The Ptolemies and Seleucids, and Roman interventions bids the feet of iron and clay appear in Daniel 2 and do not fear to be a little horn at last in Daniel 7's horrid blast. Another little horn to rise in Daniel 8, 3 in one guise, to stand in Daniel 11:5, and after as the kings alive of the north and the south to strive after Ptolemies and their gnomes and Seleucids, armies of Rome's, and then the Sunite regencies down to Ottoman tyrannies. The stone that was cut without hands in Daniel 2 a kingdom stands of the Messiah true and strong. In Daniel 7 come along its kingdom of the Son of Man. In Daniel 8 the cleansing of the sanctuary set above. And finally in Daniel 12, Michael standing up with axe helve. All these are one and the same here. The guiding hope from dark and fear. The first three kingdoms are defined by name in Daniel 2 resigned in verse 38 and to spare in chapter 8 and everywhere in verses 21 and 2 as Babylon, and then the crew of Medo-Persia, Grecia too. And so these are beyond dispute. Unless one reverts to the toot that Media and Persia must be divided into separate Ks, assuming 2nd century writer did not know history like a blighter, and so made the pseudepigraph, not knowing they were joint for staff. The disagreement only comes after this section in the hums of the historicists. The late ones of 18th century for fate tended to find the Vatican throughout these ages in their span. But Isaac Newton saw at end of Daniel 11 the bend of the Ottomans as the king of the north, and so Smith on wing. I think that Rome or any power outside the Middle East and hour is questionable as a choice because of territory's voice. Despite intrusion of crusades into Jerusalem for spades. Anomaly hardly surprising if Daniel was a man surmising. That's all for centuries 12 and after. Rome is significant for laughter only in meddling in affairs of Seleucids and the bugbears of Ptolemies, and finally ruling for after century, but not for pontiff at the stake of Vatican or in his wake. At least by century for the east of the empire was led to feast by the north-south dichotomy in itself, as theology went, and as in connection with Jerusalem, and not a myth in some that continued until Sunnite invasion of the hill, which has remained in place until the final period that comes at beginning of Daniel 12 flat. While one may still be impressed by detailed intuition or sigh of divine knowledge of the man, it is not necessary plan to exclude one interpretation for another as only station, as long as it accounts for what the prophet writes, and writes in glut. The types of stress and tension found between the secular or round pagan powers and commandment keepers are just about the same for bleepers in every time and place on earth. The prophecy contains in birth configuration of oppression, political and psycho-session, dissent, and the survival that ultimately ought to bespat governments and rulers abounding, who impinge on the conscience sounding of those who uphold law of God. Not only are the papacy and Sunnite empires full and free contenders for little horn prize, so is each other power in guise in any part of the world wise, in any age, that fosters laws of set religion giving clause. The meaningful is not that such detail in prophecy may touch vicissitudes of power that set in Palestine for centuries met. What's meaningful is that the case of sensitive approach in base to the reality in time, in the 6th century and climb, produced in prophecy also a systematic faith to go, as one's inclined here to accept, aesthetic judgment of adept art critic in regard to paint. One might be inclined as a saint to take the faith values that rise from Daniel's visions to the skies. A man who could predict the course of events over the divorce of 2 millennia and more is worth the trouble on the score. In matters spiritual in store, the major verdicts of the man are as follows and show the ban that's typical of those who live under regimes that fail to give glory to God of Torah's sieve. First is avoidance of flesh food that is unclean by death or brood. So Daniel 1 shows that the way to eat is vegetarian hay when kosher food is not around. The second is participation in secular or pagan nation does not include participation in idol worship for a ration. And Daniel 2 and 3 make clear when holy temple was not near, prayer in prostration towards the place 3 times a day is divine grace, as Daniel 6 verse 10 can trace. So the faith under false regime contains 3 points as it would seem: avoidance of the impure and idolatry, and daily stand of prayer no matter what's at hand. Other values too come to view: practice of dream finding that's true, the awareness that God is due to control earthly events too, despite illusion of the power come down in empires built in tower. Belief that God will punish sin underlies everything in bin, though perhaps not now, but in time of final judgment for each crime. Beside the visions and the values, the book contains some other dahlias. The question of chronology. I've already shown that the tree is broken by Smith in the verse 23 of 11's curse. The implication is that all the visionary cycle's call is ordered in sequence to fall from the time of the vision's stake to consummation in its wake. But there are sequences that need fitting together in their speed. in chapters 8 and 9 and 12. In sequence of chapter 8 and 9. I accept Uriah's stand, without comment or some correction, after Antiochus's rejection, as irrelevant to the book. There is no reason now to look for fault with the historicist position of Smith in the fist of timing of these chapters. Brooke. The time sequence of Daniel 8 begins in verse 14 to state, and he told me, unto the length of 2,300 strength of evenings and mornings, then shall be put right the holy chorale. 2 questions stay without reply. In Daniel 8 without a sigh. When does this era come to start? And how is it reckoned in part? As literal days are indeed, as years prophetic writ in seed. The only stated time to start is in the next chapter to show when start the 70 weeks to go. That is the going forth at last of the decree to rebuild fast Jerusalem and God's house row, accepting the day for a year, and Adventist timeline in gear. For Daniel 8 and 9 falls well, as follows in the running spell. Year 457 sees the start of the decree to build the cart of the city, plus 7 weeks, to 408 when finished cheeks of the walls rose, plus 62 weeks to year 27's view of common era when the great Messiah got anointed state, plus 1/2 week to 31 when he was cut off by the gun of Rome, and 1/2 week to add up to 34 when the glad covenant consummation had, and then the line is drawn up to the end of 2000 in view, and 300 years to begin cleansing sanctuary from sin. Time prophecies in Daniel 12 are stated to begin to shelve when the abomination of desolation is set to shove Jerusalem. Here Smith relates that the establishment in rates of papacy between the years 508 and 38 years. The time begins as in arrears. Add to that 1260 years, time and times, and at last mixty the half of time, and you come to 1798 in view, with falling of the papal crew, and start of the end time in view. To take Smith's principle to heart, that territory plays a part. I would see the fulfillment stay in Palestine and not the way of France or Rome, either in sway. Furthermore, Smith's view leaves the day of 1290 as well as Ray of 1335 to stray in limbo. First of all, the year 508 itself to appear is calculated counting back from 1798 slack. A questionable way to say the least. This arbitrary point of departure makes out of joint Smith's view of the 1290 and 1335 days to stand. But if we take the desolation in Daniel 11 in station to refer to incursions brought on the city when Sunnites sought to conquer it, then we are taught several dates after Romans fought in the 1st century in plot. The invasion by Omar came in 634, the battle flame of Yarmouk in 636, and the capture of the town to stand 2 years later in 38. But then Omar did not create cessation of the daily nor set up abominations store. Abdul Malik completed it by making Jerusalem sit as seat of the caliphate, and by building the dome of the rock on the Temple Mount there to stand in 691 right on the clock. All time sequences in the last chapter of Daniel come to blast offers a day for a year in predictions that start with the din in 634 and end at last in 1894 and cast to 1924 and yet up to 1969 set, or then they start in 91 and end in 1951 and 81 and at the last in 2026 aghast. Other important dates that came, such as Crusader kingdoms' fame in 1099, are quite ignored, simply because such kings adored did not change the state of the town under which the reign settled down, with the abomination there after the capture of the fair. The dates of 51 and more 81 may start a new score. The last of these dates has not come, but annexation of the sum of East Jerusalem set off influx of Sunnite men to scoff into the city in that year from Jordan and Arab lands fear. Furthermore, in 80 the rule of Israel gave out a spool declaring the town united and capital of the land bid, and implemented the next year. 45 years later we trust to see the end of visions burst, an opportunity to set The divine kingdom not yet met. Up in the town that Daniel knew was the seat of the divine dew. The choice remains in human view. I would not see so far in time that Daniel's prophecies a crime, determined on the day and year. Rather, I see the chance in fear to turn then, now or after, and begin to keep the Lord's command. No doubt that Smith and Newton are far brighter lights than Iron's star, and my interpretations set in poverty of knowledge met. But prophecies may sometimes be understood in new ways. Saladin and the rise and fall of the Ottomans. Daniel 11:40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south with cabal pressure him, and the northern king come against him on the wind's wing, with chariots and with horsemen bold, and many ships in count untold, and enter into the lands there, and overflow and pass the share. 41. He'll enter in the glorious land, and see overthrown quite a band, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab and Ammon's grand. 42. He'll stretch his hand on the countries, and Egypt's land shall not escape. 43. But he'll have power on treasuries of gold and silver, and the shape of all precious things of Egypt, and Libyans and Cushites all shipped. At his steps shall not be outstripped. 44. But rumors from the east and from the north shall trouble him to come, with raging to destroy and make completely away with their stake. 45. And he shall set his palace tents between the seas in the presence of the glorious and sacred mount, yet come to end of his account, and none shall help him from offense. The commentary. The end of empires in the Middle East is with the Ottomans. Last but not least, long centuries maintain the end of time. After the Sultan came through Palestine, and took Egypt, the king of southern clime, and rebuilt the walls of the city fine, Jerusalem. The end of time and states of empires on the woeful land of hates. Beloved, the ebb and flow of kings and queens rises in brilliance to pass from the scenes of earth to find your guided one at last. Stands up to rule when earthly kings have passed. He comes out from the mountains where he sleeps, and watches over the Medina's keeps. The Russians and the Persians to their shame troubled the sick man of the east to blame, and from the east and north came to trip up, until he rose in fury like a tup. Though in the end the sultans rule no more, and fields are dry now that once ran with gore. The day may come when Turkey shall rise and set palaces beyond the mountain's strand, and set the holy place beyond command. Beloved, I look for such a thing to be, that will reveal the time of Michael's fee, and that the earth shall enter trouble's way, that precedes with darkness the brighter day, when the anointed brings eternity. Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand, the great prince who stands for the band of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such to see, as never was since nation came, even to that same time of fame. And at that time your folk shall be delivered, every one to be found written in the book to see. 2. And many of those in the dust of the earth that sleep will be first to wake up, some to life eternal, and some to shame, contempt infernal. 3. And those who are wise then shall shine as brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to climb of righteousness like the stars sent, forever and forever meant. 4. But you, O Daniel, close the word, and seal the book to the time stirred of the end, till men run about, and knowledge multiply to shout. 5. Then I Daniel looked, and behold, there stood 2 others, the one rolled on this side of the river bank, the other on the side that sank of the river. 6. And one spoke to the man clothed in the linen hue, who was upon the river dew. How long to the end of this crew? The commentary. The prophecies of time have ended now. I look about the shifting and the slough, and see a world grown old in wickedness. I do not have to squint my eyes or guess. I see the time of trouble flinging past, and spreading like a cancer at the mast. I see the flight of refugee and post, of army and civilians from the coast, across the continent to set a flag, to fallen Babylon, the withered hag. Beloved, I see and hear and know your train comes with the shining stars to fill the plain, with justice as the guided one appears, allaying pain of righteous ones and tears. Daniel 12:7. I heard the linen-clothed man say, who was on river waters' sway, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to the sky on strand, and swore by him that ever lives, that it shall be a year in sieves, and 2 years and a half, and when he shall have finished upon men the scattering of the holy crowd, all these things shall be finished loud. 8 And I heard, but I did not know what it meant. Then I said once low, "Oh sir, what's the end of this show?" 9 And he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up a spell, and sealed till the end time as well. 10 Many shall be made clean and white, and tried, but the wicked in sight shall do evil, and none of them. For evil shall know aught of gem, but the wise ones left in the land, only they'll come to understand. 11 And from the time the daily's taken, and abomination that's shaken, the desolate out in its power, shall be 1,000 in that hour. 290 days all. 12 Blessed is the one that waits the call, and comes to the 1,335 days in fee. 13 But you your way till the end be, for you shall rest and stand your lot at the end of the days in plot. The commentaries as follow. Counting from Umar 634 CE. In 1894 the end appears, to 1260 plotted years. The reputation of the Ottoman died with the rumors of Armenian ban. Add 30 years and 1924 sees the Sultanate shunted from the door. Add 45 years and Jerusalem is open to the hordes that will condemn the world to the last false faith of them all, that tries to rise against your earthen ball. All faiths of all usurpers meet at last, while I stand aside from the motley cast, and pray my lot may be with Daniel now, that judgment looms upon the pallid brow. Counting from Abdul Malik 691 CE. Jerusalem became the caliph's seat, under Abdul Malik, who for a treat built the Dome of the Rock in 91 of 7th century. The time is done, of time and times and half a time when one. In 1951 when Arab hordes entered Jerusalem from Jordan's cords, Jerusalem law made the city wear the title of the capital and fair. After 1980 the prophet followed, saw how the city wavered and it wallowed, until the last date comes when it shall be, in year 2026 freely, capital city for eternity. Counting from the rise of Islam 612 CE. Fact is, I'm not the first to train my eye on this grand scheme of prophecy on sly. Adam Clarke, that great scholar name and guy. Read this to end in 1947. What happened then on earth if not in heaven? United Nations approved the partition of Palestine to give the Jews sedition. The hymns, happening, since week 29 or week of Elijah, year 5783 Anno Mundi. Malachi 4 in the book. The Beloved and I. 4. Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I did not miss, commanding him in Horeb's mount, for all of Israel to count, statutes and judgments. 5. Indeed, I will send you Elijah the by, that prophet before coming of the great and dreadful day above, of YHWH. 6. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to children's parts, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come with rue, and smite the earth with a curse to you. Commentary. Remember law of Moses, so I do. Beloved, in every sema read anew. Remember law of Moses, and Zechor. The statutes glowing in the signs before. The shimmering songs that David one time sang. I never hear them without rush and pang. Remembering law of Moses, truly you dwell in the tents of Moses and the clang of cantileting on the Sabbath light. Beloved, I come to you remembering the law of Moses, and still come to sing the Psalms of David, the Quran in swing, the gospel loves and joys in my looking. In all remembering I find you bright. So ends the Torah or Torat, as well as Zabu or the plot of David's Psalms and writings that support his reign. 2 great truths show from these 2 sacred books in row. The Decalogue is the foundation of every sort of faith and nation, and David is the king of time, past as well as of future clime. If resurrection comes to set eternal kingdom, a sure bet. 2 more books support divine law in Decalogue instead of claw. And the same books repeat with awe. The prophecy that David's reign is an eternal one as fame. These are the books to which I turn, now with ignited faith to burn, in heart with love, and not to spurn either the Gospel or Injil, or the Quran upon its heel. But those two books must both be read, to conform to the doctrine spread in the Tanakh, or else they're false, leading astray in dance and waltz. Here ends the great scripture, but I now turn to lesser ones to fly. Such books as came to bring reform, to take the hearer back from storm, into the faith of Abraham, the faith of Moses and the Lamb, the faith eternal of the King David, who rises still to sing, with those few who remain in ring, to cantillate the Psalms at last, Sabbath by Sabbath though outcast. The Beloved and I, TBAI. Week 29 or Week of Elijah, year 5783 is 1st to the 7th of October 2023.